The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell walked through the security checkpoint for what she believed would be the last time. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her uniform, knowing that beneath the crisp white fabric lay evidence that could destroy careers and expose decades of corruption within the highest ranks of the Navy. Sarah had joined the Navy 7 years ago with dreams of serving her country and making a difference. She came from a small town in Ohio where her father had run a modest repair shop and her mother taught elementary school. The military promised her education, purpose, and a chance to see the world. What she hadn't expected was to stumble upon a conspiracy that reached the very top of the Naval Command. It all began 6 months earlier when Sarah was assigned to work in the communications department under Admiral Robert Harwick, a decorated officer with 30 years of service and a reputation for being tough but fair. The Admiral was preparing for retirement, and Sarah's job was to help organize his files and prepare transition documents for his replacement. On a quiet Tuesday evening, while working late in the Admiral's office, Sarah discovered a locked drawer in his desk that had been left slightly open. Curiosity got the better of her, and she found inside a collection of documents that made her blood run cold. There were records of weapons sales to unauthorized buyers, falsified reports about missing equipment, and, most shocking of all, evidence that several naval officers had been selling classified information to foreign governments. The documents revealed a network of corruption that had been operating for over a decade. Admiral Harwick wasn't just aware of it. He was at the center of it all. The man she had respected and looked up to was nothing more than a criminal in uniform. Sarah photographed every document with her phone, her hands shaking as she realized the magnitude of what she had discovered. But Admiral Harwick was clever and well-connected. He had friends in high places, and Sarah knew that simply reporting this through normal channels would likely result in the evidence disappearing and her own career being destroyed. She needed a way to protect herself and ensure the truth would come out no matter what happened to her. That's when Sarah made a decision that would change her life forever. She visited a tattoo artist in a small shop far from the naval base, a woman named Maria who specialized in detailed, realistic work. Sarah explained that she needed something very specific tattooed on her torso, the most damning document from Admiral Harwick's collection, a letter signed by him authorizing the sale of military weapons to a known terrorist organization. Maria was initially reluctant, understanding the serious nature of what Sarah was asking. But when Sarah explained that this was the only way to expose corruption that was putting American lives at risk, the artist agreed to help. Over 3 painful sessions, Maria carefully tattooed the entire document onto Sarah's back and chest using special ink that would show up clearly under ultraviolet light, but appear as an abstract design under normal lighting. The tattoo was a work of art, and a piece of evidence rolled into one. To anyone looking at it casually, it appeared to be an intricate geometric design with flowing patterns and symbols. But under the right conditions, every word of Admiral Harwick's incriminating letter was clearly visible, including his signature and the official naval letterhead. Sarah spent weeks building her case, gathering additional evidence, and documenting everything she could about the corruption network. She discovered that the conspiracy involved at least 8 high-ranking officers and had resulted in millions of dollars in stolen equipment and compromised national security. The more she learned, the more dangerous her position became. Admiral Harwick began to suspect that someone was investigating him. Security around his office was tightened, and Sarah noticed that she was being watched more closely. Her computer access was restricted, and she was reassigned to different duties that kept her away from sensitive information. But it was too late. Sarah already had everything she needed tattooed permanently on her body. The breakthrough came when Sarah learned that Admiral Harwick was planning to destroy all the evidence and frame several innocent officers for the crimes. He had scheduled a meeting with his co-conspirators for the following Friday, where they would finalize their plan to cover up their activities and retire with their stolen wealth. Sarah knew she had to act quickly. She reached out to Commander James Thompson, an officer she had researched thoroughly and believed to be honest and trustworthy. Thompson had a reputation for integrity and had previously exposed corruption in other departments. Sarah arranged to meet him privately, claiming she had important information about security breaches. The meeting was set for Saturday morning in Thompson's office, away from the prying eyes of Admiral Harwick and his network. Sarah spent Friday night unable to sleep, knowing that in just a few hours, she would either be a hero or a pariah. The evidence on her body felt like it was burning into her skin, a constant reminder of the weight of responsibility she carried. As she prepared for the meeting, Sarah practiced what she would say to Commander Thompson. She had to convince him quickly that she wasn't crazy or making up stories. The tattooed evidence would be compelling, but she needed to present it in a way that wouldn't immediately make Thompson think she was unstable. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Sarah's nervous mood. She dressed carefully in her uniform, knowing that she would soon be removing parts of it to show Commander Thompson the evidence hidden beneath. Her heart pounded as she walked across the base toward Thompson's office, passing other naval personnel who had no idea they were looking at someone who was about to change the course of naval history. Commander Thompson was waiting for her when she arrived. He was a tall, serious man in his late 40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail. Sarah could see why he had a reputation for thoroughness and integrity. There was something about his demeanor that suggested he would listen carefully and make decisions based on facts rather than politics. Sarah began by explaining that she had discovered evidence of corruption involving high-ranking naval officers. Thompson listened patiently as she outlined what she had found, but she could see skepticism growing in his eyes. When she mentioned Admiral Harwick by name, Thompson's expression became guarded. Harwick was well-respected and had many allies throughout the Navy. Then Sarah reached the moment she had been dreading and anticipating for weeks. She told Thompson that the evidence was literally written on her body, tattooed there to ensure it could never be destroyed or lost. Thompson's eyebrows rose, and Sarah could see him struggling to maintain his professional composure while processing this unexpected revelation. Sarah unbuttoned her uniform jacket and began to remove her shirt, explaining to the shocked commander that what he was about to see would prove everything she had been telling him. The geometric patterns of her tattoo were clearly visible in the office lighting, looking like nothing more than elaborate body art to the untrained eye. But then Thompson turned on the UV lamp that he used for examining certain types of evidence, and everything changed. The hidden text began to glow clearly under the purple light, revealing Admiral Harwick's signature on a document that proved his involvement in illegal weapons sales. Thompson's jaw dropped as he read the incriminating letter that was now glowing on Sarah's skin. The room fell silent except for the hum of a UV lamp as Commander Thompson processed what he was seeing. The evidence was undeniable, permanently marked on Sarah's body where it could never be altered or destroyed. Admiral Harwick's own handwriting and signature condemned him, along with details of transactions that violated numerous federal laws and military regulations. Sarah watched Thompson's face as he read the tattooed document, seeing the moment when skepticism turned to shock and then to grim determination. She knew that her life would never be the same, but she also knew that she had finally found someone who would help her expose the truth. The evidence was literally part of her now, and there was no going back. Commander Thompson stood frozen for several minutes, studying every detail of the tattooed evidence under the UV light. Sarah watched his face transform from disbelief to horror as he realized the full scope of what she was showing him. The glowing text revealed not just one crime, but evidence of a systematic operation that had been betraying American interests for years. Sarah carefully put her uniform back on while Thompson processed what he had seen. She could tell that his mind was racing, calculating the implications of what she had just revealed. When he finally spoke. His voice was steady but filled with barely controlled anger. Thompson told Sarah that what she had shown him was the most serious breach of military conduct he had ever encountered. But he also warned her that Admiral Harwick had powerful allies throughout the Navy and the Pentagon. Exposing him would be dangerous, and they would need to be extremely careful about how they proceeded. Over the next 2 hours, Thompson and Sarah developed a plan. They would need to gather additional evidence to support what was written on Sarah's body, and they would need allies within the military justice system who could act quickly before Harwick and his conspirators realized they had been exposed. Thompson made several phone calls to trusted contacts, while Sarah provided him with additional details about what she had discovered in Admiral Harwick's office. They learned that Harwick was scheduled to retire in just 2 weeks, which meant he would soon be beyond the reach of military justice if they didn't act quickly. The plan they developed was risky, but necessary. Sarah would return to her normal duties and pretend that nothing had happened while Thompson worked behind the scenes to build a case. They would present their evidence to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and the Inspector General's office simultaneously, making it impossible for the information to be buried or ignored. But Admiral Harwick was more suspicious than they had anticipated. On Monday morning, Sarah arrived at work to find that her access to the communications department had been completely revoked. She was told that she was being transferred to a clerical position in a different building, effective immediately. Sarah realized that Harwick must have discovered that someone had been in his office. Perhaps he had noticed that his locked drawer had been tampered with, or maybe one of his conspirators had warned him that they were being investigated. Either way, Sarah knew she was now in serious danger. The transfer to the clerical position was clearly meant to isolate her and limit her access to information. But it also meant that Sarah would be working in a building far from Thompson's office, making it difficult for them to communicate safely. She began to suspect that her phone calls and emails were being monitored. Despite the increased surveillance, Thompson managed to contact Sarah through a coded message delivered by another officer he trusted. The message instructed her to meet him at a specific location off the naval base that evening. Sarah spent the day fighting off waves of paranoia, wondering if everyone around her was working for Admiral Harwick. The meeting location was a small diner 20 miles from a base, chosen because it would be unlikely for any naval personnel to be there coincidentally. Thompson arrived first and chose a booth in the back corner where they could speak privately. When Sarah arrived, she could see the tension in his face. Thompson told Sarah that his preliminary investigation had revealed the corruption network was even larger than they had initially believed. He had found evidence linking Admiral Harwick to at least 12 other officers, including 2 generals and a congressman who sat on the Armed Services Committee. The stolen equipment and weapons had been sold to buyers in 6 different countries, some of which were openly hostile to the United States. But Thompson also had disturbing news. His inquiries had attracted attention from people who wanted the investigation stopped. He had been visited that afternoon by 2 men claiming to be from internal security who had questioned him about his recent activities. They had warned him that pursuing unfounded allegations against decorated officers could end his career. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized how powerful Admiral Harwick's network had become. But Thompson surprised her by pulling out a small recording device and placing it on the table between them. He had recorded the entire conversation with the men who had threatened him, and their words clearly indicated that they were trying to obstruct a legitimate investigation. Thompson explained that he had been preparing for this moment throughout his career. He had always known that someday he might have to choose between his career and his conscience, and he was choosing his conscience. He had already made copies of all the evidence and had arranged for it to be delivered to journalists and congressional investigators if anything happened to him or Sarah. The next morning, Sarah discovered that her worst fears were becoming reality. She was called to a meeting with Admiral Harwick himself, supposedly to discuss her new assignment. But when she arrived at his office, she found 2 military police officers waiting with him. Admiral Harwick was an imposing man in his early 60s, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to look right through people. He had the bearing of someone who was used to being obeyed without question, and Sarah could feel the force of his personality trying to intimidate her before he even spoke. Harwick told Sarah that it had come to his attention that she had been accessing classified information without authorization and had been spreading false rumors about respected naval officers. He informed her that she was being placed under investigation for potential violations of military law and national security regulations. The military police officers escorted Sarah to a small room where she was questioned for 6 hours about her activities over the past several months. The interrogators tried every technique they knew to get her to admit that she had been acting improperly, but Sarah stuck to her story that she had simply been doing her assigned duties. During the interrogation, Sarah realized that Admiral Harwick and his allies were making a serious mistake. They were so focused on discrediting her that they were creating an official record of their attempts to silence her. Every question they asked and every threat they made was being documented, which would later serve as evidence of obstruction of justice. When the interrogation finally ended, Sarah was released, but warned that she was under surveillance and any further misconduct would result in immediate court-martial proceedings. She was also informed that she was restricted to the base and could not leave without permission. But Admiral Harwick had underestimated both Sarah and Commander Thompson. While Sarah was being interrogated, Thompson had been busy implementing their plan. He had presented their evidence to 3 different investigative bodies simultaneously, making it impossible for the information to be suppressed. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service received copies of all the documents Sarah had photographed, along with detailed photographs of the tattooed evidence on her body. The Inspector General's office received a formal complaint outlining the entire corruption network. And, most importantly, Thompson had provided everything to a congressional investigator who specialized in defense contractor fraud. The response was swift and dramatic. Within 24 hours of Thompson's revelations, teams of federal investigators descended on the naval base. They came with search warrants for Admiral Harwick's office and homes, and with authority to seize all his financial records. Sarah was placed in protective custody as a key witness, and for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. The investigators were particularly interested in the tattooed evidence, which they photographed extensively under various lighting conditions to create a permanent record. Admiral Harwick made one last desperate attempt to save himself. He claimed that Sarah had fabricated the evidence and that the tattooed document was a forgery created to frame him. But handwriting experts quickly confirmed that the signature on Sarah's body matched samples of Harwick's writing from official naval documents. The investigation moved quickly once it began. Computer forensics specialists recovered deleted files from Admiral Harwick's computers, revealing detailed records of illegal transactions. Financial investigators traced money flows that proved the conspiracy had been operating for over a decade. Within a week, Admiral Harwick and 8 other officers were arrested on charges ranging from treason to theft of government property. The evidence was overwhelming, and several of the conspirators immediately began cooperating with investigators in hopes of receiving lighter sentences. Sarah found herself at the center of a media storm as news of the corruption scandal broke. Reporters called her a hero for risking her career to expose the truth, but Sarah struggled with the attention. She had never wanted to be famous. She had simply wanted to do the right thing. The tattooed evidence became the symbol of the entire case. Legal experts called it one of the most creative ways evidence had ever been preserved, and it sparked discussions about the lengths people would go to expose corruption. Sarah became known as the whistleblower who wore the evidence. But the victory came at a personal cost. Sarah's relationship with her family was strained by the publicity, and she found it difficult to trust anyone after being betrayed by people she had respected. The tattoo that had saved her career also served as a permanent reminder of one of the darkest periods in her life. As the legal proceedings continued, Sarah began to think about her future. The Navy offered her a commendation and a promotion, but she was no longer sure she wanted to remain in the military. The experience had changed her perspective on institutional loyalty and made her question whether large organizations could ever truly reform themselves. The court-martial proceedings began 3 months after Admiral Harwick's arrest, and Sarah found herself as the star witness in the most significant military corruption case in decades. The courtroom was packed with reporters, military officials, and family members of the accused officers. Sarah felt the weight of everyone's attention as she prepared to testify about what she had discovered. The defense attorneys tried every strategy they could think of to discredit Sarah's testimony. They questioned her motives, suggesting she had fabricated the evidence to advance her own career or seek revenge against Admiral Harwick for some imagined slight. They hired their own handwriting experts who claimed the tattooed signature could have been copied from other documents. But the prosecution had built an overwhelming case. The financial records spoke for themselves, showing millions of dollars flowing through accounts controlled by Admiral Harwick and his conspirators. Computer records revealed the theft and sale of classified weapons technology. And, most damning of all, several of the co-conspirators had agreed to testify against Harwick in exchange for reduced sentences. When it came time for Sarah to show the tattooed evidence to the court, the moment was both dramatic and surreal. The judge had cleared the courtroom of all non-essential personnel, and Sarah once again removed her uniform shirt to reveal the glowing text under ultraviolet light. A court photographer documented every detail, creating an official record that would be preserved for legal history. Admiral Harwick sat stone-faced as the evidence literally written on Sarah's body condemned him. Even he seemed to realize that his carefully constructed defense was crumbling. The tattoo document was identical to other samples of his handwriting, and experts confirmed that the ink used in Sarah's tattoo contained microscopic particles that matched the specific pen he had used to sign the original document. The trial lasted 6 weeks, during which the full scope of the corruption network was revealed. The stolen weapons had ended up in the hands of terrorist organizations, criminal cartels, and hostile foreign governments. American soldiers had died in conflicts where they faced weapons that had been illegally sold by their own officers. Commander Thompson testified about his investigation and the threats he had received when he tried to pursue the case through official channels. His testimony revealed that the corruption had been protected by a network of officials who either participated in it directly or chose to look the other way in exchange for various favors. The most shocking revelation came when investigators discovered that Admiral Harwick had been planning to flee the country with over $20 million in stolen funds. He had already purchased a house in a non-extradition country and had arranged for false identity documents. Sarah's decision to expose him had likely prevented him from escaping justice entirely. When the verdicts were announced, Admiral Harwick was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years, depending on their level of involvement. The judge specifically commended Sarah for her courage in exposing the conspiracy, noting that her actions had prevented further damage to national security. But the legal victory was just the beginning of a longer process of reform and healing. The Navy launched a comprehensive review of its procurement and security procedures, implementing new safeguards to prevent similar corruption in the future. Congress held hearings examining how such a widespread conspiracy could have operated for so long without detection. Sarah found herself testifying before congressional committees and speaking at military academies about the importance of ethical leadership and the responsibility of individual service members to speak up when they witness wrongdoing. She became an advocate for whistleblower protection, working to ensure that future service members would have safe channels to report corruption without fear of retaliation. The media attention eventually died down, but Sarah's life had been permanently changed. She decided to leave active duty and pursue a law degree specializing in military justice and government accountability. The experience had taught her that sometimes individuals have to take extraordinary risks to protect the institutions they serve. Sarah's tattoo remained with her as a permanent reminder of the case. She eventually had it covered with additional artwork that incorporated the evidence into a larger design, but she never had it removed entirely. It served as a symbol of her commitment to truth and justice, and as a reminder that sometimes ordinary people are called upon to do extraordinary things. The tattoo artist, Maria, also gained recognition for her role in preserving the evidence. She became something of a celebrity in the tattoo community and was interviewed by legal scholars studying innovative forms of evidence preservation. Maria used her newfound fame to advocate for the artistic legitimacy of tattoo work and the important role that body art could play in personal and political expression. Commander Thompson was promoted and eventually became a naval inspector general himself, using his position to strengthen oversight mechanisms and protect future whistleblowers. He remained close friends with Sarah throughout the years, bonded by their shared experience of standing up to corruption at great personal risk. The case had broader implications for military culture and civilian oversight of the armed forces. Military leaders recognized that the rigid hierarchy that made the military effective in combat could also enable corruption if proper checks and balances were not in place. New training programs were implemented to teach service members about their ethical obligations and the proper procedures for reporting misconduct. Sarah's decision to tattoo the evidence on her body sparked discussions in legal circles about the nature of evidence and the lengths people would go to preserve truth. Law schools began using her case as an example of creative problem-solving in the face of institutional resistance to accountability. 5 years after the trial, Sarah opened her own law practice, specializing in representing military whistleblowers and government employees who had witnessed corruption. She found that her unique experience gave her credibility with clients who were struggling with similar ethical dilemmas. The practice was successful, and Sarah took particular satisfaction in helping other people navigate the complex legal and personal challenges that came with exposing wrongdoing. She understood the fear and isolation that whistleblowers experienced, and she was able to provide not just legal advice, but emotional support based on her own journey. Admiral Harwick died in prison 7 years after his conviction, never having shown remorse for his crimes or acknowledged the damage he had caused to military morale and national security. His death marked the end of a chapter, but the reforms his case had sparked continued to benefit the military and the country. Sarah eventually married a fellow lawyer she met while working on a government accountability case. They had 2 children, and Sarah often reflected on the world she was leaving for them. She hoped that her actions had contributed to making institutions more transparent and accountable, so that future generations would face fewer instances of corruption and abuse of power. The tattoo parlor where Maria had done the work became something of a pilgrimage site for people interested in the case. Maria eventually wrote a book about her experience and became an advocate for the artistic and social significance of tattoo work. She established a scholarship fund for military families and continued to work with people who wanted tattoos to commemorate their service or commemorate acts of courage. As Sarah's children grew older, she told them the story of why she had the distinctive tattoo that covered part of her back and chest. She emphasized that while she was proud of exposing the corruption, she hoped they would never face similar ethical dilemmas. But if they did, she wanted them to remember that individual conscience sometimes had to override institutional loyalty. The military bases where Admiral Harwick had operated were eventually renamed to honor service members who had died as a result of the weapons he had illegally sold. These memorial namings served as a reminder of the real-world consequences of corruption and the importance of ethical leadership at all levels of government and military service. Sarah's law practice expanded over the years, and she eventually established a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting whistleblowers and advocating for government transparency. The organization provided legal assistance, counseling services, and financial support to people who had lost their jobs or faced retaliation for reporting wrongdoing. Looking back on her experience, Sarah recognized that her decision to tattoo the evidence had been both incredibly risky and ultimately necessary. The evidence could have been destroyed, lost, or suppressed through official channels. By making it literally part of her body, she had ensured that the truth could never be entirely erased. The case became a landmark in military justice and government accountability, studied by scholars and referenced by lawyers around the world. Sarah's courage in taking such an unusual step to preserve evidence inspired others to find creative ways to expose corruption and protect the public interest. Years later, when people asked Sarah if she regretted her decision to expose Admiral Harwick, she always answered without hesitation that she would do it again. The personal costs had been significant, but the knowledge that she had prevented further damage to national security and helped restore integrity to the military made every sacrifice worthwhile. The tattooed evidence that had once been her secret burden became her badge of honor, a permanent reminder that sometimes ordinary people must take extraordinary actions to protect the values and institutions they hold dear. Sarah's story became proof that individual courage could triumph over institutional corruption, and that truth, even when literally etched in flesh, would eventually come to light.